All right. So as you guys can see, this is, if you look in the middle of the screen, the picture, that's sediment layers. At the very top is the youngest sediment layers from the most recent times to like the first 10,000 years ago, up to like 10,000 years ago. And the deeper you go, the further back in time you go. And we can date that using radiometric dating and things like that. But as you go through there, if you jump down to the bottom, towards the bottom down there around the Cambrian time to the earliest of life, that's where you see the first creatures that are forming. We'll talk about these creatures called trilobites and things like that. And as you go upwards, no matter where you go around the world and start moving upwards, you see the same pattern. You start off with invertebrates, which are basically things that don't have a spine, to simple vertebrates, things with spines, to jawed fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and then eventually mammals. There's been no point at any time, anywhere around the world, in any rock layer where you've ever seen, for instance, mammals, which is, like at the top there, like down with the invertebrates with the trilobites or anything like that. So we're going to be going today through the entire history from the beginning of life all the way up to where we are today. So we're going to start down at the bottom. You ready, Mr. O?
Oh, I'm ready. So we're going to start from the beginning, like Mr. Camp was saying, and that, of course, starts with single-celled organisms. All right, and so one thing that's interesting about, if you look at the life on Earth, you might remember the video we watched in the last PowerPoint where it kind of broke it down into 24 hours. One of the things you might remember from that video is for most of life on Earth, life wasn't really that interesting. And the reason I say that is not because nothing was happening, but it was because life was just single-celled organisms. So if you notice in this picture right here, if this was the time span on Earth where life existed, this yellow orangish band is when there were just single-celled organisms. So for a really long time, that's really all that existed. If you notice here, it says 85% of life on Earth has been single-celled organisms.
One thing I want to go back and I forgot to mention, like in our packet, that first sentence was the fossil record. Then it says creatures in the fossil record are always found in order. And then you can just put in that blank there, from simple to complex, or actually in the order. Actually, no, I take that back. The word is predicted. The creatures in the fossil record are always found in the order predicted. That's what goes in the blank there. Predicted by evolutionary theory. Okay. From bottom up, simple to larger, anatomically more complex creatures.
Good catch. Right. Good catch.
Thank you. Thank you. So if we start back about 3 billion years ago, that is your great, and you'd have to say the word great about 850 billion times, grandfather. Matches your shirt today, Mr. O. It seems it's nice. No, maybe not. That's kind of great. All right, so we're going to start here with the ultimate cladogram. So you can download this cladogram. You can make a copy and print it off yourself, or you could try to draw it out on your own, or just write out, 1 through whatever, and just number it as you go. So the first one we're going to put in there, single-celled organisms. That is bacteria and what is called cyanobacteria. Those are both single-celled organisms, the first life on Earth. And so we're going to talk about the difference between bacteria and cyanobacteria here in a moment.
All right, so this is what we call the most important event in the history of life. And this is through a process known as endosymbiosis. It's a vocabulary word for you. Endo, if you can remember from past things we've learned, that means into. Symbiosis is a beneficial relationship for 2 different organisms. So this is actually how single-celled organisms became more complex. So in this diagram, you can see here a bacterium, which itself is a single-celled organism, was basically consumed by another single-celled organism. And because of that relationship, they both provided each other with something beneficial, right? Where the bacteria that was consumed end up becoming the mitochondria for the cell. If you remember, for the mitochondria is the powerhouse, meaning it's the thing that provides energy to that cell. Whereas the cell that consumed that thing gave the bacteria protection. So both things benefited from this relationship. If you look in your notes on number 1, it says Cambrian, this is when variety began. Why and theory, and this is your vocabulary word right there. Endosymbiosis. Bacteria was absorbed by a cell and became the powerhouse, the mitochondria.
So that word symbiosis, is the video covering that, or maybe it is on my screen, but I don't know if you move it.
Yeah, it's wide open here.
Okay, so it's right there, that ENDO word, endosymbiosis.
And it says mitochondria enabled cells to produce 15 times more ATP, which is just a fancy word for energy, than they could otherwise. So again, once it consumed it, it provided a benefit to it.
All right, so there's 2 types of bacteria that we're going to look at. There's the ones that led to the type that created animal cells, like you and me. And then there's the type of bacteria that got absorbed that led to plant cells. And you can obviously tell an animal and a plant cell apart by their shape. Animal cells are round, plant shapes. The plant cells are more rectangular. But at some point, there was a bacteria that used oxygen that was absorbed by the round ones, and those led to animals. This is why you and me require oxygen to breathe, because the powerhouse of our cell was a type of, which is mitochondria, was once a type of bacteria that would require oxygen. The other type of cell, the plant cell, it didn't absorb the oxygen breathing kind as much. It took in ones that had what's called photosynthetic bacterium. This is the cyanobacterium. And those eventually became the chloroplasts of modern day plant cells. And instead of taking in oxygen to survive, these are the ones that instead would take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen, just the way plants do. So they both have powerhouses of the cell. One takes in oxygen, the other takes in carbon dioxide. But the reason why there are 2 different types of powerhouses of those cells is because they have different types of bacteria that were absorbed into them at some point in the past. By the way, just to let you know too, it's kind of crazy. Your mitochondria produces so much energy that if you were to shrink down to the size of mitochondria and you were near mitochondria, it would be like being struck by lightning. That's how powerful. Yeah.
What's happening inside every one of your cells?
Every single one of your cells. Yeah.
Shoo, shoo, shoo. Do you want to go over this experiment? I read about it. But...
Sure. Yeah. So in this experiment here, this is where somebody wanted to prove that it was possible for a bacteria to be absorbed into a cell and become and undergo endosymbiosis, where they both rely upon each other. So here's what happened. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, you see those little green things right there? Those little green things were bacteria. They just put the bacteria around those single-celled organisms, those things that are in blue there, those little blue splotches. So what you're seeing there is a bunch of single-celled organisms in blue, and then you're looking at in green, like the different types of bacteria. Now, some point, as you can see in number 2 there was some bacteria that was brought into the cell, and it was absorbed in there. Now, what had happened there, if you look there where you see those little red X's, what that means is that some of the bacteria caused the amoeba to become sick and they died. So very few of those single-celled organisms survived. So the bacteria killed off some of them, but not all of them. So if you jump down to number 3, that's the single-celled organisms that survived with the bacteria in them. So scientists were wondering, well, maybe they are working together. Like that bacteria could become like the powerhouse of the cell, the way that some bacteria became the powerhouse of our cell and became the mitochondria. So what they decided to do was try to kill the bacteria. And they figured if they could kill the bacteria and the bacteria died and the cell relied upon the bacteria, that proved they were working together in endosymbiosis. So what they did was they put some antibiotic in there, and antibiotics are used to kill bacteria, obviously. And so as you can see in number 4, they killed the bacteria with antibiotics. The bacteria died, and when the bacteria died, boom, the cell died as well. That means it had become dependent upon the bacteria. They had began working together. So that's kind of some modern day evidence that was a microbiologist who did this in 1966 in a laboratory to show that this is completely possible, that they could end up working together.
All right, so we're going to fill in a little bit more of our cladogram here. So if you have that copy, just pull out that piece of paper, or if you're drawing it yourself, just follow along with us. But if you notice here, we have our single-celled bacteria and cyanobacteria, animal, plant. When the cyanobacteria was consumed, it became the chloroplast, and that would lead to the branch of our cladogram, which would lead to plants and algae, because those are plants. Those are things that rely on chloroplasts. However, the single-celled organisms that consume the bacteria, which are like animals basically, became the mitochondria. And we're not going to click on anything here, but we have, this leads to all the other organisms, the animals that are going to fall on our cladogram the rest of the way.
All right, so before there's that blue-green algae that which required that cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria is the stuff that, remember, that we said takes in oxygen and releases, or takes in carbon dioxide and releases oxygen. The atmosphere on Earth was something that we could not even breathe. It looked like what you see here. The atmosphere of the past was mainly volcanic gases. So in order for the atmosphere to get to the point where it's like today, where it's about 80% nitrogen and roughly around 20% oxygen for us to breathe, blue-green algae, which is a type of plant, had to basically take in the carbon dioxide from this volcanic atmosphere and spit out the oxygen. And over thousands, if not millions of years, the Earth's atmosphere was slowly transformed by this algae that was forming and out in the waters of the earth, and slowly created an environment that made it so that we could breathe today. So there's the presence of the blue-green algae metabolized it, and then this actually led to the first shelled creatures. We're talking about some things like this, and the thing is, like with these creatures, had they not had shells at this point, because there was no oxygen, we learned back in the chemistry section that when oxygen is around other oxygen molecules and lightning strikes, they can fuse together and form ozone. That's the molecule O3. But without an ozone layer, the UV rays coming from the sun would cook basically anything that did not have a type of shell in that environment. So a lot of the other types of living creatures, you go up near the surface, they would be cooked by the radiation, the UV rays. So there's eventually those who formed different types of shells, and that protected them so that they could kind of, emerge from the oceans, and they wouldn't have their DNA damage from UV rays. So over time, with all that production of all these things that were releasing oxygen and taking in carbon dioxide and replacing all the volcanic gases and everything, this led to what we have today. About 80% nitrogen, about 20% oxygen.
Yep, right. And those are some answers on the notes. If you look down there at the bottom of that first page, letter A, it said the blue-green algae led to the creation of shelled creatures. So right there's that first answer. And then part B is the same thing as B on here. It created the ozone, which is needed to protect life emerging from oceans from the deadly UV rays that could damage their DNA.
So the two words you're missing there are shelled and ozone.
And then number 3 as well. This led to a change in the atmosphere into what is today. And then at the bottom, here's your answers. Around 80% was nitrogen, 20% is oxygen, which is what we still have approximately today. Coolio. Yeah, sorry about jumping on your back there. Just didn't know you're following some notes. Toit. Look at that.
And this is, of course, once we have this type of environment with oxygen, this eventually led to plants being able to evolve out on the surface of the earth. And then that, of course, transformed the environment even more to what it is today. And this led to worms, insects, and things like that eventually being able to start colonizing land. You know, these things came out of the ocean and evolved. But we'll go into more detail about some of the other type of stuff like that later.
All right, so if we're filling in our cladogram here, so once the bacteria was absorbed and became a mitochondria, that led to the first animals, and our first animals for our cladogram are going to be the insects, worms, and crustaceans. Crustaceans are what Mr. Camp was just talking about. Those are like shelled animals. And then, of course, the insects and the worms. We're going to talk about this video in a little bit at the end, so I'm just going to click through this. I'm just going to jump on this, Mr. Camp. So, okay, all right. So single cells to little shells, and then 25 million years later, we get creatures called trilobites. All right, so single cell, well, no, nothing. Single cell, and then finally we get our first creatures, and they are the trilobites. This is a trilobite. You can kind of imagine it if you've ever seen like a roly-poly pill bug type of creature. It's a little bit like that in the sense that they have that same kind of shell, but some of these things could get up to about a foot long. So these things were just monstrous. And you might even be able to find these things actually if you ever go to a riverbed or something like that and are looking for fossils. They're actually relatively easy to find around Indiana and Ohio as well. But these were some of the very first creatures to show up on Earth. And then we got the Cambrian explosion. This is when a variety of life began to form. Again, if you remember that video that we'll show you at the end where it said like 24 hours of evolution, right when those first organisms started creating, there was basically just an explosion of multicellular creatures, which we'll get into.
All right. Then roughly about 500 million years ago, like in the fossil record, this is the first time that we have any signs of a creature that has a backbone. So that's a blank. That's number 4. And it has a weird name. I don't know how to say that. Pichia gracilens? I don't know. So that's the first thing. And that ancient backbone is called a notochord. If you look at that picture there, is Notochord, notochord. So that's like kind of like the first type of a backbone that we've ever seen. So they have these muscles attached to it, and it's at this point it's only attached to cartilage. There is no such thing as bone at this point. There's only cartilage, and it makes them be able to like swim really fast and like move really fast because cartilage is really flexible. It's the stuff that makes up your nose, the stuff that makes up your ears as well. It's bendable, so it allows them to move when they swim. And it kind of looks like what we call a modern day lamprey. And so a lamprey is right there. It's got those, it looks like it has a little sucker, you know, it's like that. It doesn't have any jaws yet. It's basically just like a mouth, and it has this teeth there. So that's the first thing that has the closest thing to what we would recognize as a spine. So right here, the first thing with the backbone takes us all the way up to what's called a lamprey. So first thing with the backbone.
All right. Then the next thing that developed is the jaw. And what a beautiful jaw we get to see here. Here's a conodont, a frilled shark. And so the jaw developed, and as you might imagine, jaw, if you think about, obviously we talk about evolution, typically you're only going to develop something if it gives you an advantage over what you previously had. And so if you think about a jaw, what the advantage of having a jaw versus no jaw is, it allows animals to actually not just get food, but actually grab and hold on to food so it can't get away. So on your notes down there, it says number 5, then the jaw developed, and this is an easier way to get food. Those without it, besides the lamprey, which is the thing that we just talked about, seem to die out at this point because jaws were such a huge advantage for these creatures.
Would you say that they were getting more food than others? They were a little more,
Oh,
is that why others died?
I would definitely say that.
Oh.
Definitely say that. Getting way more food.
All right. And then about 410 million years ago, that's the first creature that has two sets of fins. All right, so they have like this front fin, and with the front fin, what that did, that provided speed, that provided some type of locomotion. They have these muscles that were on these fins that allowed them to propel them pretty well. And then you have the pelvic fin, which is towards the back, and that provides stability. It's kind of like on a boat where you have a rudder that goes in the boat, and as you go through the water, it helps you steer. So you have speed and steering, and they have this cartilage spine, they have these jaws. So now you're creating basically at this point the ultimate predator, to be able to go out to swim fast and accurately and just snatch things out. So this helped them swim faster. And so what would this lead to? Fins, jaws. Bruce. That's right. Led to Bruce.
Mr. Bruce. That's what you put on your notes, guys. Bruce.
Bruce. Yeah. Yeah. So, of course, this led to sharks. So, believe it or not, we haven't got to dinosaurs yet. And so sharks are actually far older than dinosaurs. A lot of people don't know that.
Sure. Silly people.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, again, if you're following along in your notes, that's number 6. So 2 sets of fins led to sharks. All right, so we're just rolling right along, right with our notes here.
Picking up speed.
Oh, we're just rolling hard. We're going down the hill. So then skeletons. So now we were taught. Mr. Camp said we had backbones, but it wasn't a backbone. It was really just cartilage, a thick strand of cartilage. Now we're going to actually get reinforced skeletons, what we think of as bones. And if you think about what's the advantage of bones over things like cartilage, stuff that our ears and our nose and stuff like that's made of, you're going to have a lot more strength to it. So bone adds strength, and then you have collagen, which is a very flexible material. It adds flexibility. And so now these creatures that have fins, they have jaws, they have bones, they have collagen, all these things are working together to create a creature that can move faster and obtain prey much better. So this led to what are known as fish, or bony fish, because they actually have bones. That's why if you ever swim around with fish or try to catch a fish, it's not the easiest thing in the world, because they're kind of fast and they can move very quickly.
Now down there, by the way, if you go back where it says fish, what does it lead to? Fish or fishes? This one of my biology of fish or fishes class I took in college. One of the things I was taught was that, a lot of people think that you just say fish, and that is the plural for fish, and that is true, but you could technically say fishes sometimes. Do you remember what circumstances that is, Mr. O?
When you want to.
Yes. Yeah. So if you see a whole bunch of the same type of fish, if they're all like, for instance, goldfish, you could call them, hey, look at all those fish. But like in that picture there where it's very colorful, you see a bunch of different species. So if there's a group of more than one species of fish, you can say, look at all those fishes. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff. The things that these kids learn from us.
I know, right?
Lucky ducks.
Yes.
And of course, on our cladogram, that's the next one. Bones develop. We got fish. Unless there's multiple fish of multiple species, then we got fish is. All right. Then around 393 MYA. MYA, if you remember from our last PowerPoint, that just stands for millions of years ago. This is when the first fossil tracks of vertebrates starting to walk out on land. And this actually brings up one of the animals that we talked about in the last PowerPoint, those things called, oh no, we didn't talk about coelacanths, we talked about Tiktaalik. But coelacanths were creatures that actually still exist today We thought they were extinct until we just randomly found them not too long ago. But there's these fish-like creatures, which I think we have a picture in a minute, where you can see that these creatures have larger bones that looks like it can actually support not just swimming, but actually maybe support a little bit of their weight in shallower waters. But right here we have a video, whoops, of catfish walking on the street. So it kind of gives you an idea of what maybe some of these first fish coming up onto land might have looked like. I don't know if there's any audio or not to this, but.
And if your video looks like mine, it's a little jerky when it moves. But if you look up catfish walking, you watch this in real time, you see these catfish are actually like, it's like they almost have like these little like, they're able to like push and they're able to jump, and they're like literally kind of like walking down the street, kind of like they're kicking around and propelling themselves with those front fins.
And I know I've seen videos maybe when I was a younger kid, especially like out in the desert or very arid places, you'll find these types of, I'm not sure if it's that one itself, but a fish very similar to this. And the advantage of this obviously is if their water hole starts to dry up, they have the ability to leave that water hole and potentially get to another one if it's closer by, so they don't have to just sit there and basically dry out and die. So it gives them a huge advantage over the things that are stuck in that water. This is funny watching this guy. Not play, because I'm sure it's not very clear for you guys.
All right, so one of the reasons why evolution would select for these guys, Mr. O kind of brought about earlier on, is that, first of all, and this is that Tiktaalik rosé or whatever we talked about in the last video, and this is where you have like the first time that you can have your head move independently from its shoulder. So instead of it all being connected, it can actually move left or right, and that helps it be able to attack and get its food much easier. It can point its head and everything towards it. And also you have the first arm, shoulder, wrists, things like that make it more flexible, so it can actually push itself against the ground and propel itself forward. Like Mr. O said, that if there's an area that was like dried up, or maybe there's some rocky streams where some fish couldn't, it gets to a certain point, they got to stop because there's no more water. These guys could climb over those rocks and get into other waters and get some food that the other ones didn't even have access to. So this brings us the lobed fins. Lobed fins means they can propel themselves. You get the coelacanths, or it's called the Tiktaalik. All right, so it looks like we're about halfway there.
Loving it. All right, so this led to the first creatures that actually had developed limbs, and these would be the amphibians. All right, so we're at number 9 right now. First creatures with limbs, amphibians. And these are the first creatures, because they had to be able to live partially at least on land. One thing that had to also change is they had to be able to get oxygen from the air rather than getting oxygen from the water through gills and things like that. So they also developed some of the lungs. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Simple. Fish, amphibians, and reptiles were laying eggs for millennia before birds evolved. There we go. There we go. We got the answer. Neither one.
So this is number 9, where it says this led to the first creature's limbs. So for number 9 in that blank, you should have amphibians.
Mm-hmm.
Amphibians. So here's the Chinese giant salamander, and that is actually it's almost like a living fossil. It's endangered, and it's one of those that basically embodies everything that is about ancient amphibians. As a matter of fact, these guys actually don't have like the type of lungs and everything that you'd imagine like we would have. They actually breathe through their skin, where they can like take in the oxygen from the water around them. So if they ever get really, really dried out, they can die. So they always have to kind of be around water, but they can also breathe air. So this almost looks like that Tiktaalik rosé, and this led to over 7,000 species of amphibians that are around today.
And fun fact, I think this is true, but these salamanders can get about 5 feet long. if I'm not mistaken. They're the largest amphibians in the world. So just imagine walking up on one of these bad boys.
I bet you could outrun it.
Maybe.
I know you could.
I would hope to. I would hope so.
Yeah. Then we're at amphibians. After we get limbs, the first amphibians.
All right, we're cruising for a bruising. All right, and just a reminder, we kind of throw this back in here, although we talked about this at the very beginning of the PowerPoint, because you might be questioning, how do we know this, then this, then this, then this, so forth. It's because, again, the fossil record. So we know these things because we looked at the layers of the fossils. We know when those layers were formed. We know what came before what. And so just a reminder there. All right, now amphibians had two problems that basically kept them at least partially tied to water. So if you can kind of think real quick, what could that be? What could that be? What could that be? All right. The first one is the skin had to stay moist. I don't know if you're a person that likes or hates the word moist. Most don't like it. But if they do leave the water and it dries out, obviously they could die from that. So that keeps them at least somewhat relatively close to water. And then the second one is, if you've ever seen frog eggs, for example, they're kind of like these slimy, gooey things. We actually saw a picture of these when we talked about external fertilization back in the fertilization unit. But their eggs are very wet. They're very kind of ooey, gooey, kind of nasty if you've ever picked them up. That's because they need to have water to keep them moist. So if for some reason that puddle that they laid their eggs in dried up, their eggs would dry up as well, and those wouldn't develop into actual offspring. So these are the two things that kept amphibians at least partially tied to water, even though they could move out on land as well.
But there were some creatures that evolved to fix this problem where they could eventually move away from the water and lay their eggs anywhere they wanted to. And these were the reptiles. And this is number 10, where it says creatures evolved to fix this problem. These are the reptiles. So the first thing is, like with amphibians, because they lose so much of the moisture from their skin, they could, if they get too far away from water, they could dry out and they could die. So they always had to stay real close to water because of laying eggs and because they have to keep their skin really moist. But reptiles have what's called keratin. What is Keratin? That goes in the blank there. Keratin basically is something that creates a very strong barrier that keeps all the moisture inside of your skin. You have it in your own skin as well, and this is why you do not dry out. You can go outside and you don't have to like take you can go outside all day for hours. You can go out for a very long time. It's not like you're going to require a shower like every hour or so to not lose all the moisture from your body. The second thing is their eggs became watertight. So the water wouldn't just evaporate on it. If a frog were to lay its eggs, an amphibian were to lay its eggs on land, they would dry out so fast they would die. But reptile eggs became watertight, and so they could go out basically anywhere. They don't have to be in water, lay that egg, and that allowed them to venture away from streams and things like that. Over 9,500 species today. So there's so about 300 million years ago, that would be your great. Say that about 125 million more times, and that would be what your great grandfather would look like. I can see the resemblance, Mr. O.
Thank you. I think that's a compliment.
I was talking about myself. I was looking at myself.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And so on your cladogram, guys, watertight egg has keratin in their skin. That, of course, is the reptiles.
And one thing I do want to point out is that these on the cladogram where you see these individual things, like it says limbs form, and after that we see amphibians or watertight egg and keratin in the skin, then you get reptiles. Keep in mind, these are not the only traits that made them different than the other ones. These are just the major ones that led to vast differences that led to macroevolution, where you get completely different species that led to vast evolutions. But there could be thousands of different little evolutionary kinks along the way separating amphibians from reptiles, but we're just hitting the major ones.
Good call. This also led to the dinosaurs. And I know we kind of talked about this, I think, again, the last PowerPoint, which of the pictures of the penguin versus the crocodile versus the whatever it was an actual dinosaur, closely related dinosaur. But a lot of people have this question: what makes reptiles different from dinosaurs? Because in our picture, we're thinking probably Jurassic Park, and they seem like they're the same thing. All right. So the first thing, and one of the significant things, is they developed hips so that their legs are underneath them. So in the last PowerPoint, when we said, which one of these is most closely related, we had this cute little penguin up in the corner. Obviously, it kind of looked odd, but that was the most closely related to a dinosaur, because out of all those pictures, the bird is the only one that had their legs underneath them, just like a human has the legs underneath them. Whereas reptiles, like a crocodile, their legs are splayed out. So if you ever see them walk, they more like waddle rather than actually walk. And so that's what separates dinosaurs from reptiles. This lets them carry more weight because your legs are straight underneath them. If you know physics right, it gives you much more ability to carry a lot of weight versus out on the side. This allows them to move easier, right? If you ever watched Jurassic Park, you know what I'm talking about. Which makes them also very fast, or like much faster than animals with their legs out to the sides. I believe we're just rolling right through our notes, right? All right, you got those listed right there already. And they can stride much longer, right? So they can take bigger steps, which makes them faster, which allows them to move easier as well. So if you look up on our cladogram here, we're going to take a little detour off of this stick right here. All right. So we have hips develop, and that leads to our dinosaurs.
I like this one. Every time I'm sad, I imagine a T-Rex trying to put on a hat.
Sorry, T-Rex.
I don't know if it should make you sadder or what. All right. Then about 129 million years ago, two-legged dinosaurs, the kind of the size of like large cats, basically, were the ones that developed. This is what's called a Sinosauropteryx. And notice that in that picture there, it kind of looks almost like a lizard, almost like a bird, but it has feathers. So one of the things they found is in the fossils of the Sinosauropteryx, they found filaments with cells for color. All right, they found pigment in it, and that's the first blank on your paper there, underneath number 12. So they found color, and they even found different types of pigment that led to spots or stripes. And of course, this was the sign that they did indeed have feathers. I believe it was in the 1980s where I think it was James Horner. He was a famous archaeologist that had and paleontologist that had studied dinosaurs, things like that. He predicted that because of their shape, their body structure and everything, their anatomy, that dinosaurs were very similar to birds. So he thought that they had evolved from birds. And it wasn't, and I think these feathers with color and stuff like that was only found very recently, I think in China, within the last 5 to 8 years. So he made a prediction and it was good. So this led to a change to a tree living way of life. They were able to go up into trees. So they were able to get food up in higher places they couldn't get before. They could like flap their arms, and those feathers could help propel them a little bit. If they were running from predators, they could run real quick and glide. So this is the second blank that you have there. They escaped predators by gliding. This gave them more speed and agility. If you've ever seen like an ostrich run, you could see where they balance their arms like this, and that makes them more agile. And it allows them to regulate temperature. And so they're able to go into places, like with those feathers, the way that they can lose heat, or the way that the feathers could actually keep them insulated and warm, kind of spread out as well. If you know much about birds, they get oil on their feathers that makes them waterproof as well. And because of those bright colors, it actually allows them to attract mates as well. So one of the things that they do, like we've talked about with peacocks and things like that, is those bright feathers are used to attract a mate. So there was a clear evolutionary advantage for developing feathers with dinosaurs, because it allowed them to get food, escape predators, gave them speed, adjust their temperature, and attract a mate. Just wonderful all the way around, feathers. So this eventually led to, of course, what you guys know as feathered dinos. And this is some artistic rendering of what they believe some of these look like an angry rooster. And I think that's kind of like a Archaeopteryx. I like this one. This is new dinosaur that they discovered. I don't know how you say that, but it was basically a 6-foot-long velociraptor. And the scientists who had discovered this fossil basically called it a fluffy feathered poodle from hell. That it had been like a very, very scary feathered poodle. And this, of course, led to birds. This is number 13. Led to birds. Number
I'm filling it out too.
All right.
All right, so it's the other strand right there under hips developed. That's dinosaurs and birds because they both have hips underneath them.
Getting closer to humans.
Oh yeah. Then a catastrophe, or a series of catastrophes, because although a lot of people believe just one thing ended the dinosaurs, most scientists actually believe now that it's a whole bunch of things that kind of slowly killed them off. And maybe the asteroid meteor was just the final straw that basically finished them off. But this led to the dinosaurs' extinction, leading to a world up for grabs for another group, right? So now that those apex predators, the dinosaurs, were gone, that kind of opened up a lot of niches for other animals to come in and fill now that they were gone. It's the final countdown.
Oh, I thought we had the song in there. I guess I never put it in there. Sorry.
I did it. I put the song in there with my vocals.
Oh, you did.
But anyways, this led to the dawn of the mammals. And this is one of the first mammals that we believe existed when they came about. And this is called the Hadrocodium. If you notice, it just looks like maybe a more vicious rat-looking creature. So if you're afraid of mice and rats, you'll probably be terrified of this thing because it looks worse.
Looks like a rat that works out.
Yeah, I'm just focused on this foot. What is happening here? Like, it just looks messed up. I don't know.
I think he's just kind of leaning down, just like getting ready to pounce on somebody and like rip out their throat or something. I don't know.
Ooh, that's what we should have added to this. Added that. All right. So some key evolutionary advantage to mammals that would lead to humans. Since they didn't find their strength in space, they found it in time. At first, they were night hunters. We talked about this again last PowerPoint, right? Since the dinosaurs were out during the day, it wasn't really smart for mammals to come out at that same time because they would not have been the apex predators. They would have been killed off by the dinosaurs. So they were mostly night hunters when they first came around, so they could survive. That's because reptiles, dinosaurs, most likely needed at least some form of heat in order to survive. So they were nocturnal. So they became warm-blooded. If you think about being at night, where it's usually much colder, it's hard to regulate your body's temperature or let the environment regulate your body's temperature because it's cold. So your metabolism wouldn't be functioning very well. So any animal that wanted to exist at night needed their bodies to regulate their own temperature. So mammals became warm-blooded. It says here it requires a higher metabolism to do this, requires more food to have a higher metabolism. So they had to also find more prey. The body became coated with fur. All right. Again, another way to protect themselves from colder climate or cold temperatures at night. This keeps food requirements down to stay warm since they don't have to use their metabolism to keep their cells warm. And it prevents excessive heat loss, right? It's like a coat, keeps them warm. They don't have to waste energy to stay warm. And then lastly, how did they see at night, right? They got that in quotes because it wasn't all about seeing. Some of them use their olfactory system that, if you remember, is the smell, your sense of smell. So some of those animals can smell really, really well. So even though they might not be able to see their predators, maybe they can't, or the prey, right? They can use their smell to find those things. At flat jaw, the bones in the back of the jaw shifted to form a middle ear bones, which allowed them to also hear much better. So even if their sense of sight wasn't as good, their other senses allowed them to survive at night just fine. And then the last one, I can't even see that. Basically, it says something about forming whiskers as well, which are basically receptors so that you can, in a sense, feel around while you're hunting, moving, things like that. Whiskers was about to get the job until they saw his ID photo. That's pretty good stuff. That is pretty good. There's a video I watched yesterday of a cat screaming. It sounded like a human being. It was one of the most terrifying things
That is terrifying.
I've ever witnessed. But I'm sure we just knocked out a whole bunch of things on our notes, didn't we?
Yep. Yeah, like almost that full page there. That brings us up to that was A, B, C, and the 3 parts of letter C there on the notes there. So we're about halfway through that page.
All right. I'm liking it.
All right. So next, mammals evolved larger brains. All right. And this, a lot of this came for a couple things. Number one, because they were warm-blooded, like Mr. O said, and so they needed more food, but they were getting more food. They were able to get more protein, and this led to larger brains. So that was a big deal there. So that's letter B, larger brains. So you'd write in the word brains there, letter B. They also inherited the ability to lay eggs from their reptile ancestors. So this is where you get your platypus. So this is something that is furry like a mammal. It has, we talked about, it produces, we're going to talk about in a moment about how it produces milk and why it produces milk, but it still lays eggs. So it's kind of like something that's not a reptile, but it's not a mammal yet. It's still in that transition, and we still have some of these things around today. And so this is what on letter C, where it says inherited laying eggs. So you would put in the letter, for letter C, you write the word eggs, E-G-G-S, in your notes there. But then we began producing milk, all right? And when we began producing milk, gotta take my notes here because the video is kind of covering it up here. Let's see, began producing milk. This led to monotremes. And so some examples of that is what a platypus, what's called an echidna. The platypi and echidnas, I don't know the plural for that. They are kind of the link in between reptiles and mammals. So here's how this kind of led to developing eggs. Monotremes, like a platypus is, actually reduce the amount of yolk that's in the egg. Now, remember, whenever you have an egg, you have the yolk in there because that's the nourishment for the child that's developing within that womb. And so because the monotremes reduce the amount of yolk in the egg, there's a gene that turned off some of that. They began to hatch much sooner, and that required more nourishment. Well, if you hatch it very soon and you don't have that yolk giving nourishment, you've got to feed it something once it comes out. So it's because it's not getting the nourishment from the yolk. So they got a mutation that allowed them to produce milk. So 2 out of the 3 genes for producing yolk disappeared, got switched off, and then a gene for producing milk started providing nourishment. Now, I think that covers that. Yep. So there's a platypus. We had that picture earlier. There's some baby platypi. We talked about Perry the platypus. So there we talked about before them, like they thought in the cartoon they were sweating milk, but they were really just lactating. They produce their milk through their skin. So if you look at this cladogram here, you can see where the platypus is right up there, right below the possum. It's you can see that it's in between the possum and the lizards. All right, so it's something that has traits of both reptiles and mammals. And we could probably skip that since we.
Yeah. Been there, done it.
Yep.
All right, so fill in the cladogram, guys. After warm-blooded, night vision, better senses, fur, produce milk. Those are our mammals, and the first mammals were the monotremes. We are getting there. All right, so like Mr. Kemp was saying, echidnas and platypus, they also began to produce milk, which provided the nourishment for the offspring once they were born. Here we're talking about what are some of the evolutionary advantages of milk. First off, there's no limit on how much that animal can produce, right? So the mama mama cow, mama platypus, mama whatever, can produce as much milk as required for their offspring in order to survive.
By the way, this
And
is sorry, this is letter E on your packet. If you're filling it in, letter E on your packet.
and there's no limit on how long you can produce milk for. So you may have heard stories about this, but sometimes when moms are still giving milk to their kids when they're 3 or 4 years old, because as long as they're producing milk, they won't stop until that baby stops consuming milk. Good example of this also is cows. If you know how cows make milk, they first have to get the cow pregnant to have a baby. And then once that cow has a baby, it's going to start lactating, producing milk. That's when farmers will take that cow and start milking it every day. And as long as they milk it every day, they can keep milking it until the cow's unable to produce milk anymore. So the milk that you're getting, it never comes from a cow that's not had birth first. Otherwise, that mother cow would never produce milk.
All right, so here's some key evolutionary abilities that basically end up leading to mammals. Mammals have warmer bodies. They have powerful senses for like hunting at night, and they can produce milk so they could keep giving nourishment to their young and help them get strong. That says, save yourselves, mammals. We'll fend off the asteroids. Never forget. 65 million years ago. Thank you, reptiles and dinosaurs, for that. But laying eggs meant that the mother had to protect the young from predators. If you lay the eggs, the predators are going to be around, and so you just got to stay there. So there was another mutation, an evolutionary advantage that came around, that instead of eggs being laid, the child will be born alive. All right, and this led to two groups that do this. What are called marsupials, which you'll see on the left, like a koala, kangaroo. On the right, you see what are called placentals. They also give birth. They like elephants, humans. All right. So that's the two types there. That goes in your blank. So number 15, it says this led to marsupials and placentals both, and you can say give birth to live young. That's what's on the right above the picture of the snake. Can you fill in that blank there? Both give birth to live young.
And then the next blank, marsupials. Those would be the kangaroos and things like that. Oh, which is right here. Never mind. I stole the thunder. All right, so marsupials, like Mr. Camp was saying, that includes the kangaroos, wallabies, koalas, a lot of animals you probably associate with Australia and New Zealand. But these are animals that have pouches, and these allows mothers to go and hunt for food with their children. So if you think, I know I showed my class this, but if you ever seen a baby, I might even have a picture here. Brian, you're 42, isn't it about time that you? Oh, it's like some of you guys, right? But anyway, what do you mean I'm not a bear? I have all the qualifications. Oh gosh, these are funny. Do we have a picture of the baby? Oh, okay, we don't. But anyways, if you look at a baby koala or a baby marsupial of any kind, but a kangaroo, look at a picture of them. They look like tiny little, almost like baby mice. They're pink, they're naked, they're extremely underdeveloped when they're born, and they're completely helpless. Now, if you're an animal that has to watch over those little itty bitty babies all the time, it's basically like taking care of an egg. You can't leave it. But these marsupials, because they have pouches, they can basically just take it with them. So these little babies will be living inside the pouches. Mother can go out, find food. They can go hunt. They can run away from a predator. They can do all the things that allows them to protect themselves and to protect their offspring. This also, it says the mother could produce different consistencies of milk to feed kids of different ages at the same time. So let's say a mother kangaroo had a newborn, they just had them, and then they still have one from last year. They could produce different types of milk to feed both the older one and the younger ones at the same time, which is where you get that ridiculous picture of this guy who's 42 still hanging out in his mama's pouch, taking the milk. All right. And then, however, outside the pouch, the young are extremely vulnerable to accidents and to different diseases, especially when they're first born.
That is the most awkward picture of a kangaroo I've ever seen.
It is. It's like a gold. what's that one picture, the Jurassic Park picture?
Oh, Jeff Goldblum.
Jeff Goldblum. Kind of looks like him just checking out. So what is the solution? What is the solution? We'll get to that right after we fill in this cladogram. So after live birth, the first ones to do that were the marsupials. And you notice we filled in a couple notes there on that last slide, so we'll let you go back and knock those out.
So the solution, because these kids are outside the pouch and they were vulnerable, the solution is the idea of what's called the placentals. All right, and by the way, this is where we start coming in here, us mammals, and we're about 100. This happened about 160 million years ago. So this is what your great. If you say that about 55 million more times, that would be what your great grandfather would look like. And these mammals had fur, they could produce milk, and they also had live births. And what they're doing is they're going to nourish the young actually before birth, and they're going to do this inside. So this is where it's going to develop what's called the placenta. So we're going to mark that there. These are all the other mammals. These are the other mammals that are what are called placentals. We'll talk a little bit more about the placenta here in a second, I believe.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the next couple of notes right here, follow along in your notes. The placenta. So what is the placenta and why are they called? That's why they're called the placentals. The placenta is what feeds the baby and gives oxygen while in the womb. We've got a picture here, right? It's this thing that basically surrounds the baby. All right, it gives the baby everything that it needs in order to survive inside of the womb. The umbilical cord, which I'm sure you guys, if you watch any TV shows or movie, right, when they take the baby out and they cut the umbilical cord, this thing that's literally attached to the baby, this is what allows the waste to leave the baby and for the baby to get nutrients from the mother. And if we want to get nasty for a second, this is also, if you've ever had, I don't know, a lot of people have had dogs or cats that have had birth and had babies. One of the things you might notice is when you watch them after they give birth, they might start licking their pups or licking little baby kittens and removing this like slimy, nasty thing off of them. That is the placenta. You can see this ox or whatever this monster is right here, right? It's eating the placenta. And you might wonder, what in the heck are these animals doing? That is the nastiest thing in the world. Well, if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, for these animals to eat the placenta, there has to be some type of advantage in that. And the advantage obviously is it's food. It is food. It has a lot of nutrients in it. Some scientists even believe it like rebalances the hormones of that mother after she's kind of spent it all to give birth. And what's interesting is you find it disgusting, but there are actually some people that are starting to take advantage potentially of this placenta. So sometimes even mothers will ask the doctors to keep the placenta so they can take it home and actually eat it themselves because it thinks it gives them some type of nutritional benefit or it does some other stuff that they believe in. And so here's a yummy picture. You can imagine sticking a fork in that thing.
I don't know how many of them eat it like that.
Yeah, probably nobody, but somebody might eat it like this. This is called placenta soup. So if you've ever had chicken noodle soup, this is a joke, by the way, guys. This is not a joke, right? You can actually go and buy pills that have it kind of ground up into it as like almost like a vitamin kind of thing. Here's a placenta omelet. So just cut that up. All right, it's like sausage. I like
yummy.
Sausage. Here's a placental smoothie. All right, so if you worry about getting it down, as Mr. Camp takes a drink of this drink, that's perfect timing. This looks yummy.
Yeah, and from what I read from people studying this, they're trying to figure out, is there actually any benefit for people doing this? Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, scientists say not really. And do you know what the number one reason why?
Because it's nasty.
Oh, well, that too. Because we get to go to the grocery store, like animals out in nature, they eat it because they won't have quick access to food, but we can pretty much just open up the refrigerator and get everything that we need to replenish what we've lost. So
Mhm.
there really isn't, when you have technology, there's no reason to eat the placenta. So I think some people do it for some type of natural type thing, but really just eat a steak, dude. Not dude, but
They thought it was good. They finished it up.
yeah, they finish it all. They make the placenta smoothie and pizza.
The placenta is also a life-saving device since half the baby's genes are from the father. You might say, what in the world does that mean? And we talked about this before. It's basically a layer of protection for the baby. Remember, the baby is half mom, half dad, but it's inside the mom. So the mom's body is going to think, wait, this isn't me, so let's attack it and kill it. But the placenta provides a layer of protection saying, hey, let's take care of this thing that's inside of this. Don't worry about it. All right. It protects the baby from the mother's immune system. So her body basically doesn't attack and kill it.
And there you go. That's in the blank immune system.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So then about 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs disappeared. They eventually became our fossil fuels, when we talk about fossil fuels. So the mammals, of course, are the ones that took over. And the reason why mammals began to take over is they began to specialize. All the different niches out there that were filled by the dinosaurs were in the air, they're in the water, they were on land. Basically, mammals began to do this. So mammals can do about anything. So that's the word that you need to fill in the blank there, specialize. It's in all caps right there. They began to specialize, and they rapidly adapted to fill the niches. I think that's how you say that word. Left vacant by the dinosaurs. All right, so here's what they did. Number one, they could do things like eat insects. So some of them ate insects. So some of them have big rat-like teeth. So they could eat meat, they could eat fruits, they could eat grains. They have different types of teeth, sharp ones for like cutting through meat. They have more flat ones so they can kind of grind through different types of grains and stuff. Some of them had molar teeth. Some of them stood on their toes. Like the horses could actually, we talked about how they evolved. They start off running on their toes, and eventually those bones fused into like a hoof. Some mammals even went on to develop wings and like bats, and they had used their ears and developed echolocation, like a bat. So if you think about mammals, no matter where you go around the world, mammals are in the ocean, they're in the desert, they're in the snow, they're in the air, they are everywhere. Like mammals can do almost anything. We're like pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do we need to watch these videos? I did not.
No, I think we just go on.
Okay.
I think those videos basically just kind of went along. I think we showed some of those videos before.
Yeah. And here's just some of the creatures that they believe evolved, going from water to land, land to water. So if you remember, these are pictures of land mammals basically going back out into the ocean to make mammals that live in the ocean, which are whales and things like that. So you can notice how their hind legs are getting smaller. And we've talked about these pictures before, so we won't spend any more time on them. Little hind legs still, all right. They're still there, but they obviously can't allow a blue whale to walk. All right, so proving that they're mammals still, right? They have a placental. They have a placenta just like we do and other mammals do. Getting some milk. Baby whale getting some milk. Warm-blooded, if you didn't catch that.
Yeah.
All
right. Real quick, too, about mammals. Anything that is in the ocean that has mammals, one way, too, to kind of identify anything that's a mammal, if you look the way it swims, because of the spine that mammals have for walking, anything that's a mammal in the ocean swims like this. Like kind of like when you see something like that, its back fin goes up and down, where anything that's a fish, the back fin is vertical and swims like this. So anything that's a mammal, because it back fin is like this because it used to walk on land, and its spine can only go that direction, not as much this direction.
Good stuff.
So why did mammals evolve so quickly? What led to mammals just like filling in all these different niches and stuff like that? They evolved so quickly because of a climate change. There was something that happened that after 10 millions of global warming, there was this surge because it got warm. It was cold for a while, but it got so warm. There's a huge amount of plant life. Everything was growing really well. It led to all these forests. And with all these different forests, there's lots of different kinds of food to eat. And so when we talked about geographic isolation in the past, we talked about how different creatures would go in, like if one creature was eating one thing on one side of the island, but another creature was eating something else on the other side of the island, they stop breeding together, and over thousands or hundreds of years, they get to the point where they're no longer creatures that can breed together. They start that separation of eating different types of food led to them becoming different over time and evolving. So different kinds of plant life evolving led to a lot of different things that creatures could evolve into. So, I think that's something else dealing with climate change. We can go on with that from here.
All right, so this led to 37 million years ago, led to the first primates. All right, so we're at number 18 on your notes. They are the first animals to have opposable thumbs, which because of all the forests and the trees and everything else that's starting to kind of take over the land, this allows them to climb, which allows them to get away from predators. It allows them to go get the food that's up in the trees and things like that that other animals couldn't get to. And their sight improved as well, which is important because in large open areas, they need to be able to see everything that's going on around them. So let's read a little bit about how fruit, never mind. All right, so on our little cladogram here, opposable thumb, walk upright, and then skull. There are the primates.
Primates.
Boom, bada bang.
Then the climate changed again, and places became drier. And as they kind of dried out, there was less forest. So you had these big open spaces. And this led to what they call the megafauna. Like it's megafauna. Fauna just refers to like the size, these creatures, the type of creatures. And they were huge because the thing is, if you were in a big open space like that, if you were the size of a mammoth, or this is where they had giant sloths, elephants, things like that. If you were really big like that in these big open spaces, you could survive. But if you were small, you did better off if you were like running into the forest. You could climb trees, you can get up and get out of the way. If you were a smaller creature in these open spaces like that, there wasn't any place for you to climb and get out of the way. So things in open spaces could evolve to get big. They didn't have to worry about getting in between some of the trees and the brush and the shrubs and the forested areas as much. So this led to some of the giant creatures. Many of them went extinct. I think the mammoth didn't go extinct until somewhere around 10 to 12,000 years ago. But we still have elephants today. So in mammals, they started to evolve larger, and that's basically they were safer against predators. Those big open areas.
All right. So at this point, mammals were one of two things. They were either large mammals in the open areas, or they were smaller mammals in the forest, for the reasons Mr. Kemp just mentioned to us. About 2.5 million years ago, ice sheets spread from north to south. And about 10,000 years ago, that's when Mr. Kemp was saying this just before, that's when a lot of this megafauna vanished, which perhaps led to the super predator. And we're not talking about this predator if you watch the movies, which are pretty good. I like predator movies and the alien movies, by the way. But the super predator, we mean primates that could walk upright. And if you're thinking to yourself, I know what that is, that's a human being. You're right. All right. Along with this, and we actually just read the article about this last week, the shoulders developed. If you remember that allowed them to be able to throw things very quickly, which allowed them to hunt more efficiently. So they could hunt from further away. They could also kill larger things because they could throw things faster and penetrate the skin, things like that. Okay, that was a picture from the article we read. Okay, boom, bada bing. That's why pitchers can throw it, 90, 100 miles an hour, where a chimpanzee, a primate, could only throw it probably about 20 or so miles per hour. Okay, this led to a skull, larger skull, if you remember. Okay, we could hunt better. Means we got more protein, which is energy. Our brains got bigger. If our brains are getting bigger, we got to have a larger skull for that brain. And if we have a larger brain, that allows us to do things to use that brain. All right, allowed to very efficient communication, which allowed us to hunt and pack, which allowed us to hunt even better still. So if you look off our cladogram, we've got a little branch coming off that primate branch. So we got to include A, B, and C. I put them on the cladogram, but if you're doing the little box down here at the bottom, it's the same thing. If you don't have the space on your printout, or if you don't have space on the paper that you're drawing on, you can just write them down at the bottom, right? But walk upright, throwing shoulder, bigger skull, communication, led to the humans.
And so, yeah, so they believe that megafauna, one of the main reasons why it went extinct, perhaps it was us. Perhaps we hunted them down. We were the super predator. Yes. This led to us, humans. All right, so we start off there in Africa, and then we begin to spread. And from all the things that we see in the fossil record, our existence, the idea of humans, once you start seeing humans in the fossil record, you see humans go into a certain area, all of a sudden you start seeing the fossils in the fossil record of the megafauna. Like we're talking like the giant sloths and mammoths. All of a sudden, the amount of their fossils gets wiped out. It's like we show up and then they disappear. So that's why they think that humans were the ones that eventually led to the extinction of those. Why elephants didn't go extinct? That's a good question that we will have to ponder and keep pondering, I guess.
Like to ponder.
Mystery.
And that's it, y'all. Right there.
Right.
Humans.
Yeah. Last blank. So that's the end of our evolution section, you know. That's oh, I forgot about those. We don't have to cover all that stuff.
Yeah, I'm just looking for that video. All right, so there's the finished one. Real quickly, we just wanted to go over this again. This is actually the same video we saw in the last PowerPoint, but we just wanted to put it here again. This was the evolution in 24 hours. So just getting a context, kind of a spatial context of how long this cladogram kind of went from the beginning, single-celled organisms, all the way to primates and humans. So I wonder if, you know what, I'm gonna have to.
Is there no sound?
Yeah, I think I forgot to hit the record computer sounds.
Oh, that's all right. They can go back and look at the other video. We've already seen this one.
Yeah, YouTube it, watch it from the other one. It's all good. So we'll just stop it there.
All right. So I think that's it. Next week we're going to shift gears completely. We are done with evolution now.
We are. We're going to start the states of matter and pressure.
Yep. One of our favorite sections. All right. That's it.